Okay, wake up, take another hit of coffee or Monster or Red Bull or something so you can stay awake for our presentation on cancer. Cancer, here's kind of the symbol of Cancer Society. And you can see that they're trying to portray that there's a relationship between weight, diet, and physical activity. So as we go through, we'll talk about some of these things and look at how nutrition plays a role in either increasing the risk of cancer or decreasing the risk of cancer. Both of those can be involved in that. But before we do, uh, I know some of you out there have had to learn English as a second language. Most of us grew up speaking English, so we don't realize how difficult sometimes learning English could be for someone who has it as a second language because some of the words are spelled the same, but they have a different meaning and they are pronounced differently. So let me go through some so some of us that have spoken English all of our life can appreciate maybe someone who has to try to learn English. So let's go through them. The bandage was wound around the wound. The farm was used to produce produce. The dump was so full that it had to refuse more refuse. We must polish the Polish furniture. He could lead if he would get the lead out. I'm sure we know people like that. Um, the soldier decided to desert his post in the desert. Since there was no time like the present, he thought it was time to present the speech. A bass was painted on the head of a bass drum. I did not object to the object. The insurance was invalid for the invalid. They were too close to the door to close it. A seamstress and a sewer fell down into a sewer line. Upon seeing the tear in the painting, I shed a tear. So I think most of us can relate to this if we were trying to learn English, that it would not be that exciting sometimes to try to figure out what the word means, how to pronounce it, and all of that. Okay, I'm just showing you this to as kind of an introduction to cancer, but you can see and look at the risk factors with tobacco being on top of the list. But in our case, you notice that obesity and overweight are number two. Diet is kind of down the line a little bit. You can see it kind of in the middle of the thing, but there's that relationship a lot with obesity. But there are some other things in our diets that can promote cancer, and we'll talk about promotion here in a minute. They may not cause cancer, um, but they will promote it and help it to grow. So let's go in and statistics. As you can see here, um, from the Center for Disease Control, CDC, uh, the leading cancers among men and women, so prostate cancer, breast cancer, but after that, lung and colorectal are uh, the next two down the line. Um, and you can see the top 10 cancers here, kind of related between men and women, but then, the rates, but then the deaths, lung cancer tends to kill more people than anything else for that. Which states have the highest rates of cancer? You can see down in the South. I think we've talked about them before with obesity and everything. Um, they have the highest incidence. Oregon's not doing too bad. Looks like the Midwest would be the place to go if you want to reduce cancer rates, possibly. I mean, obviously, you'd have to change your lifestyle, but those would be the places to go. And then in Oregon, you can see we're no different than the rest of the country. Prostate, breast cancer is still number one, lung and colorectal cancers. So we're right in the same scheme as the rest of the country. Mortality rates, again, looking at those, you can see lung cancer is number one, other cancers, but so anyway, smoking, obviously directly related to lung cancer, but that doesn't have anything to do really with nutrition. So we'll focus on the nutrition aspects as we go through. Just as a overview, and I'm hoping that y'all have had some cell biology and have had some information about cell division, including mitosis. Um, but in most cases, our cells respond to instruction and basically do what they're told. Um, and if something goes wrong, they can go through apoptosis. Your body will uh, tell the cell that you need to basically kill yourself because you're damaged. Well, in cancer cells have a tendency to be able to override those signals in some sense or form. And I don't know if you've talked in some of your biology classes about P53 and some of the tumor suppressors and the proto-oncogenes and those kinds of things, but those are all related to the response of the cell. But if the cell doesn't respond, basically it can abnormally divide and create a tumor. So basically, cancer is cells that don't follow instructions and they basically are dividing on their own for no purpose. Benign tumor is basically a tumor that is enclosed in a capsule, as you can see, and it doesn't spread. It becomes obstructive, like you probably heard of the people who have the cantaloupe-sized cancers in their abdomen or something. If you can totally remove a benign tumor, it won't come back because it doesn't spread to other parts of your body. Um, on the other hand, malignant tumors do not have a capsule, and individual cells can break off of the tumor and get into your lymphatic system or your blood system and spread to other parts of the body and cause secondary tumors. So this is kind of an illustration of that. On the left, you see a non-cancerous tumor. It's enclosed in a capsule. And again, it just gets bigger and obstructive. Now, if it's in your brain, I mean, it's not completely round. I don't want you to get the idea that the cancer is completely round. They can have little appendages. They still have a capsule around them, but they can have little appendages. So if they get like in your brain, sometimes it's hard to completely remove them. And the issue with them, they're growing so fast that they're basically sucking up all the nutrients and not allowing the other cells to get them. And so those cells can die, and long term livability is not that good. But you can see on the right, a malignant tumor, you can see the blood vessel where individual cells are breaking off and getting into the blood vessel. And then they can go to different parts of your body and incorporate themselves into tissue, and then they can become a tumor on their own, and that's called metastasis. And you will have this spreading tumor. I'm sure you know individuals who have had tumors all over their body and that kind of thing. So that's not good. So there is a progression to the development of cancer. Uh, and you can see on the right there are different aspects. And so we will be using these terms. Initiation is something that actually mutates the DNA that would cause the beginning of cancer, most is from my knowledge, nutrition in most cases, unless it's an additive, uh, doesn't initiate cancer. Um, Now, the second part, the promotion piece, yes, nutrition does have a role in promoting cancers, which basically means a promotion. Anything that is a promoter can either make it easier for a carcinogen to get in, or when the cancer begins and the cells start dividing abnormally, the promoter can encourage their growth and actually make the cells divide even faster. So, two things, and they're both related to nutrition. They make the carcinogen easier to get through the plasma membrane and mutate the DNA, or it promotes the growth of the cells and encourages the increased speed of their growth. So the development is you basically have to have an exposure to a carcinogen, whatever that is, entry of the carcinogen into the cell. So the carcinogen has to be able to pass the plasma membrane and get to the nucleus. Okay, now those two things, again, food normally, unless it's an additive of some kind, doesn't cause those things. Doesn't mutate the DNA. So food is not involved in the initiation of a neoplasm. Now, a neoplasm is, by definition, an abnormal growth of cells for no purpose. So tumors start out as a neoplasm and then eventually get bigger and they're called a tumor. Now, the fourth thing, enhancement by promoters, yes, that's where nutrition can play a role. But there are anti-promoters. So we'll be talking about promoters and anti-promoters. And so as we go through, I want you to make sure that you're comfortable with which things that we could eat that would be promoters, which things that we could eat could be initiators possibly, and which things could be anti-promoters, right? So eventually, though, if everything's the right conditions, then we would have the formation of a tumor. Okay. So again, kind of looking at some of the aspects of cell division. I don't know if you've ever heard of P53. In my biology class, we do talk about P53 when we talk about cell division in cancer. But the main thing that I want you to focus on is that oxidative stress, because we have talked about chronic inflammation, we have talked about oxidative stress, but as you see, oxidative stress can be a factor in cancer promotion, because P53 is one of the tumor suppressors that will initiate apoptosis. Apoptosis, again, is cell suicide. So if something happens, P53 can check it, and if the cell is damaged, it can say and either try to repair. You see on the left-hand side under B, you can see the P53 will stop the cell division, and then it will repair. If it can repair the damage, it will. If not, it will tell the cell, sorry, you're too damaged, you need to go through apoptosis, which is cell suicide. On the right-hand side, though, you can see where oxidative stress is affecting the ability of P53 to do what it's supposed to do. So cell division will not be arrested, and the cancer cells will continue to go through cell division. So again, oxidative stress kind of raises its ugly head and can be involved in cancer. So there are some things that would cause cancer. As you look down this list, you can see that most of them have nothing to do with with food, a lot of things, most cancers are caused by something outside of the cell. The cell usually doesn't just become cancerous. Something from the outside is initiating it. But the poor diet on the bottom, it has to do with promotion and or anti-promotion. So we'll be looking over that a little bit closer. All right, so what I'm going to be going through are the American Institute of Cancer Research, AICR, American Institute of Cancer Research recommendations. I mean, there's a big thick book about all the recommendations, so I just went through and isolated things that related to diet and nutrition kind of thing. So what I want to go through is looking at their criteria related to nutrition and if it's a promoter, an initiator, or an anti-promoter. So for exam purposes, you'll kind of need to know what the recommendations are and then what the risks are. I'm not really concerned that you remember the goals or anything like that. I'm more interested in you understanding the risk factors of body fatness. So let's look at those. So body fatness is considered a promoter. Again, a promoter is anything that would encourage the initiation of a cancer by something else, by making it easier to get there, or by increasing the speed of cell division. So the first one, estrogen production, we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about phytochemicals. And we said that basically soy has phytoestrogens that can decrease the effects of excess estrogen. So we said that excess estrogen can have an effect on stimulating growth of cells because that's what they do is they fit into a receptor and then the phytoestrogens would then fit into those receptors and reduce the ability of estrogen to express itself fully. But what they found is individuals who are obese, what I said earlier in the phytochemical section was that in as a general rule, even normal weight women produce more estrogen than they need. But what I've read is that women who are obese produce like 3 times more than that. So even though normal would produce more than they need, then obese would 3 times more than that. So the risks of promoting the cancer are a lot higher if you're obese, plus the fact that obesity kind of reduces the ability of the body to resist, the excess estrogen being fitting into a receptor kind of a thing. And then we just talked about increased chronic inflammation or oxidative stress can be a promoter because it's going to allow initiation and growth of that tumor by what we just talked about, maybe reducing the P53. I mean, there's some other things. So body fatness is considered a cancer promoter because of the estrogen, because of the oxidative stress. Okay, because remember we said obesity, when the fat cells get bigger, they start producing some of the pro-inflammatory cytokines and the interleukins and all that kind of stuff. So mainly though, it's related to colon, breast, and endometrial cancer. So anyway, so the recommendation is to, if you lose weight, you're going to reduce your risk of promoting cancers. Again, body fatness doesn't initiate cancers, it promotes it. Okay, there's a difference. And this is kind of an illustration of the receptors, and you can see that the estrogen receptor on the left, if the estrogen fits in there, but as you can see on the right, the anti-estrogens, phytoestrogens and so forth, will fit in there and can't bind, and so they would reduce the effects of the estrogen. So, this is just an indication that there is a relationship between type 2 diabetes and cancer, and it's directly related to obesity. Remember, in type 2, we said visceral obesity was a key factor in type 2 diabetes. Uh, and so you'll see that there is a relationship between the obesity, the inflammation of type 2, and cancer. So type 2 diabetes does have a higher risk for cancer. All right, food and drinks. Basically, this recommendation deals with eating too much food. So sugary drinks, but we've talked about refined sugars and energy dense foods. We've talked about those, and they're basically encouraging the reduction of processed foods with sugar, basically fast foods. Let's just face it. The fast foods is the one they're kind of focusing on here. But increased food intake is considered a cancer promoter. Number one, because it will increase the risk of getting overweight or obese. And so we just talked about the effects of obesity. But the other one is related to energy dense foods or high fat intake. Because what they've also found in looking at animal studies and a lot of things, some human studies, and that is that people that eat high fat foods tend, women tend to produce more estrogen because they're eating the high fat foods. And so, not only does obesity increase estrogen, but high fat foods increase estrogen, and we just talked about its effects. The other thing, though, that I want you to get down is the idea of increased bile production. If you remember when we were talking about digestion, we said that bile was going to be produced to emulsify fat, but also to be part of the mycel that allows absorption of fat soluble things. So, I mean, should make sense to you that the more fat that you eat, the more bile you have to produce. Well, there's two types of bile. The primary bile is the bile that's initially produced by the liver, it's stored in the gallbladder and then released when you eat a high fat food so it can emulsify those fats and get them absorbed. Well, what we also mentioned is that the mycel is not absorbed into the cell. It goes back out into the lumen, and the potential of that, and the mycel contains the bile, parts and bile, the potential of that is it gets into the large intestines, and the bacteria start kind of fermenting it, basically, and breaking down the bile into something called secondary bile. And secondary bile can be a promoter for colorectal cancers. So the idea would be basically the more fat that you eat, the more bile you have to produce, the higher the risk that bile is not going to be reabsorbed by the body, get to the large intestines, and the bacteria will change them into secondary bile and increase the risk of colorectal cancers. Okay. Just kind of as a side note, this would be the reason why they would recommend high fiber foods also, especially the insoluble fibers that we talked about that reduce the risk of colorectal cancers, because they are going to increase the speed that you would have waste removal. And so that would reduce the risk and the time available for the bacteria to make this secondary bile. But, in saying that, you probably could also assume that people that eat a lot of fiber don't eat a lot of fatty foods. So But still, if you eat a regular diet, the potential of producing secondary bile is there if you eat some fat and food and that kind of thing. So the insoluble fiber, and we'll talk about it later, would be considered an anti-promoter, right? Kind of a thing. All right, red meats and processed meats. Uh, and so no more than 18 ounces per week. So for most of us, you would say, whoa, that's not a lot. Divide that by seven. So it's about 2 ounces a day. But there is a relationship between red meat and processed meats and cancer, and they are initiators. So these things can be initiators. Uh, One of the ones, a heme iron, especially a lot of it, has been shown to damage the lining of the colon. And heme iron, if you don't remember, is iron that we get from animal foods because it's in the hemoglobin, whereas non-heme iron would be the iron like in spinach and stuff like that, that is not in hemoglobin. So heme iron is the one that seems to be damaging, but again, you have to take this into perspective, is that this would be individuals who eat a bunch of red meat. I mean, tons of it. I mean, there are people that do that. I mean, they just like red meat and they eat a lot of red meat. They do a lot of barbecuing and stuff like that. So you have to take that in perspective of how much red meat does a person eat. Smoked meats, basically when you smoke meat, so this would be like if you had a smoked turkey where you put the turkey in a smokehouse and had wood smoke and stuff. Well, when you burn the smoke, there's chemicals in that smoke that get embedded into the meat, and some of them are called heterocyclic amines, and they are considered initiators of cancer. They are carcinogens. But again, how much smoked meat do we eat? So you have to be careful. There may be people that eat a lot of smoked meat. I don't know. Smoked salmon, smoked turkey, smoked chicken, smoked fish, just all of those. Now, the barbecue issue is basically meats that you barbecue and then the fat drops on the coals and then the coals release the smoke from burning the fat. And they have what are called polycyclic hydrocarbons, and that smoke, which basically makes the food taste good, let's face it, that smoky flavor, those are carcinogens, right? So the polycyclic hydrocarbons can get embedded into the meat, especially if it's a fatty meat that's dripping a lot of fat and you get a lot of smoke, and then in the parts of the meat that gets kind of charred, the blacker part, you would even have more polycyclic hydrocarbons. So, the recommendation is not to eat a lot of barbecue, or if you do eat a lot of barbecue, marinate, because some of that marinade will capture and drip off some of the smoke and stuff like that, especially if you use like a barbecue sauce or something. But, in all of these are all considered initiators, mainly dealing with colon cancers, but colorectal cancer is starting to go up, kind of thing. So you just have to see in your life how much of these do you eat, kind of a thing. I just put this on here for just showing you that I don't know what New Zealand, New Zealand eats a lot of meat. I don't know if it's a bunch of sheep or what it is, but they're way up there. But we're not far behind of eating a lot of meat and then the incidence of colon cancer. So you can see on the bottom there's a direct relationship to how much meat. And then, again, in nutrition, meat means beef. So chicken is poultry and turkey, and then you have pork and so forth, but meat is considered beef. So it's not all meat. And then but you can see the amount of beef consumption, and then on the left, the incidence of colon cancer. Basically, the more red meat, the higher the incidence of colon cancer. That's what it's trying to reflect. Okay, preserved foods, basically looking at salt. What they found in areas of the world that eat a lot of sodium, and this would be like maybe Asian cultures or Japan, whatever, that use a lot of like soy sauce or miso, some of those things, and they have a very high salt intake. Um, have an increased risk of stomach cancer. And so, salt in this case, and we would consider salt an additive, right? Because it's not normally present in a lot of foods, a lot of sodium would be an initiator. Because salt will damage the stomach lining and basically cause probably some initiation of the cancer. So, salt is considered in this case a carcinogen almost. I mean, it's not really, but in this case, if you eat a bunch, that can start damaging the lining of the stomach cells, and then kind of increase that cancer, then it's referred to as an initiator. So the recommendation is to reduce the amount of salt that we intake and limit the high salty foods. Alcoholic drinks. Now, alcohol is considered an initiator. All right. And so their recommendation is to limit the amount of alcohol you drink. Now, the recommendation, they would like to say zero, but it's not realistic, so they limit. But you notice the limiting alcohol drinks is the same as we basically have with diabetes and that kind of thing. Um, so they're pretty much consistent with the serving size and all of that. But alcohol damages DNA. And so you can see that basically everything that alcohol touches, a lot like your mouth, your pharynx and larynx and esophagus, that are exposed to alcohol, then would be suspect for cancer, and they have shown, and there is a relationship between the increase of those. So anyway, have to look at your life and how much alcohol do you drink, and then go from there. Plant foods. Now these are considered anti-promoters. Okay, and anti-promoters are going to decrease the risk that carcinogens would get into your system and into the cells and damage the DNA, or they're going to reduce the possibility that a promoter will encourage the speed of cell division. Okay. So fiber, we just talked about that. The insoluble fiber increases the transit time. And I will try to put a video on that you can watch if you wish about how fiber can change the microbiota of your microflora of your intestines and reduce risk of cancer or increase risk of cancer if you have a low fiber diet. So, but insoluble, once again, is going to help with eliminating waste. So you reduce the risk of that secondary bile also. But there's some other things, chemicals that the video will go over. Phytochemicals, we've talked about those kind of ad infinitum, but they're going to be protective, and they're going to decrease the risk of promotion and or initiation of cancers, and anything that's an antioxidant. We talked about some phytochemicals that are antioxidants, but some of the vitamins, vitamin D or E and vitamin C, and some of those will reduce the risk of getting oxidative stress. So all of those things would be considered anti-promoters. Now, physical activity is not nutritional, but I wanted to add it. So on an exam, if I was to say list the uh, um, nutritional risk factors or nutritional things that would reduce the risk of promotion or whatever, I wouldn't expect you to put physical activity. I wouldn't expect you to put smoking because they're not nutritional. But physical activity is an important aspect of reducing risk of cancer because it increases your immune system and it just keeps your body in tune. Um, so this would be the same recommendation we looked at with reducing weight, where we said you need to get 150 minutes per week in at least. I mean, that's the minimum, and then try to increase that if you can, and that's just going to reduce the risk. So lastly, here's the newest cancer progress report that I've got. So what they're saying is that cancer death rates are declining, and you can see on the bottom left, you can see where the death rates are declining, and the kind of the most recent I could find was 2013, because it takes about 5 or more years before they get data and then they publish it. So this is 2013. But you can see on the right, the new cases are increasing. So the medical community is doing a good job of keeping people alive, but the incidence of people getting cancer is rising because of some of the things we've just talked about. Okay, so 30% of most common U.S. cancers diagnosed could be prevented with changes in lifestyle and getting to a healthy weight. So we talked at the very beginning, where obesity. So as we've gone through this course, I hope I've brainwashed you into the fact that obesity is a huge, huge problem worldwide. And it is increasing the risk of a lot of different issues that when you guys get into healthcare, you're going to be dealing with. So you're going to be dealing with obesity, bigger patients. You're going to be dealing with type 2 diabetes a lot, the cancers, all of that stuff we talked about related to obesity. It's just, and I think I mentioned it, I may be kind of pessimistic, but I don't see that decreasing. I don't see obesity going down. I don't see type 2 diabetes going down. I don't see the incidences of cancer rates going down. There's a direct relationship, and so hopefully I'm wrong, but I just don't think so. I think it's just a matter of if you can't beat them, join them. So the medical community is just going to have to come up with better and better ways to reduce death rates, and that's pretty much it. And then you see the last, more than half of the global cancer cases are a result of preventable causes. So we can prevent cancer if people want to. But the problem is a lot of them don't want to. All right, they don't want to change their life. They just want a pill. Just fix me, give me a pill. I do not want to change my life. Right. So anyway, that's our focus on cancer. So I hope that you got something out of it, and hopefully it will allow you to make some better decisions in your life and your family's life.